and welcome to GameSack. This time we're talking about some games that may have taken just a little bit too much inspiration from another game.
Yeah, definitely. The developers of these other games saw the high potential of mass selling, popularity, and decided they want some of that action, and hey, they went to get the cash.
Oh, absolutely. So let's take a look at some of these games. Almost everyone knows about the original Legend of Zelda for the NES. It was a great game that emphasized exploring and dungeon crawling. You also needed to find specific items in dungeons or defeat all enemies in a room to escape. I don't really think I need to explain much more about this one, as we all know how it works. But what about kids like me who never really went through the original Zelda since we had a Sega Master System instead? Well, the good news is that we have some pretty cool rip-offs we could play. First up is Golvelius from Compile. This has a very similar overworld where the screen snaps into place as you wander around. On almost every screen there's a secret hole to discover. These can be found by killing an enemy or two or just pushing something out of the way. Inside of these holes are people or things that'll help you out. It's always fun finding these. The dialogue is fantastic. You'll encounter such brilliant writing such as "Thou art a pinhead, we art thine friends," and more. But all is not what it seems, because you also get side-scrolling action stages that are pretty fun. The character animation here is a little weird and you don't even turn around, but the control is pretty good and it's fun. You also have forced scrolling overhead stages that are pretty entertaining. The graphics are nice and the music is peppy. If you have access to a Master System or a power-based converter with an FM chip, then it has an option for that as well. I really like both the FM and the normal PSG soundtracks, though I think I prefer the PSG version. Compile did a really good job of expanding on the Zelda formula with this one. Golden Axe Warrior, which is also on the Master System, is definitely a more faithful ripoff. Now you might remember Golden Axe games being beat-em-ups. Hell, so do I, but not this one. You're looking to find 9 crystals and then kill Death Adder. You explore the land looking for dungeons to conquer. Inside the dungeons is also similar, where you need to kill enemies and trigger switches in order to advance to the boss. What's nice is that there are lots of places to save your game and also inns to stay at to restore your health. The biggest problem is finding the damn dungeons in the first place. But after defeating bosses, you'll get things that'll definitely help out, like this axe to mow down bushes to reveal secret passageways. There's also magic that you can use which will help you as you fight. Some of it actually looks pretty impressive, but it's still too weak to take out a lot of the common enemies. The graphics are far better than Zelda in my opinion. The music here is good, but it's certainly nowhere near as epic and you can only hear it in PSG, but that's fine. This is a good game in its own right, and I'm glad that Sega had absolutely no shame so I could enjoy it on my Master System. Crusader of Senti on the Genesis is also another good clone. This one was brought to the US by Atlas and is known as Tolil and Ragna-Senti elsewhere. The comparisons to Zelda are pretty obvious, especially the mowing down of the vegetation similar to Link to the Past. One simple thing that really sets this one apart is the ability to walk diagonally. Blast processing indeed. You can also throw your sword pretty far away from you. This can help you look around or even trigger switches that you can't reach. You also acquire different animals throughout the game, each of which do different things. You can only equip 2 at a time, so you gotta choose carefully. The gameplay introduces enough cool new things to help set it apart as its own game, so you won't hear too many people declaring it as a blatant ripoff. The graphics are generally pleasant, and the music is fairly decent. Sadly, this one's getting pretty expensive. And we can't forget about Newtopia for the TurboGrafx 16. Ooh look, a girl is kidnapped in the middle of the night by a demon. And guess who gets to rescue her? This one follows the Zelda formula pretty damn closely. You even have bombs that you use to blow open walls to reveal rooms and whatnot. There are a lot of people that can be found who give you hints about the story and also about the game itself. It's all pretty standard fare, but what it does very well. The graphics are very colorful and sharp, and the music goes well with the gameplay too. This one doesn't take many chances, but I definitely recommend it if you have a TurboGrafx 16. Of course, that got a sequel called Utopia 2. You play as the son of the hero from the first game. This one doesn't really do many new things. However, you can move diagonally, and that is damn cool. I like that. It's a well-playing game with some good graphics and sounds, but I just wish there were more aesthetic improvements at least. Again, it's recommended. Finally, for this segment, we have 3D Game Heroes on the PlayStation 3. Despite having one of the worst names for any game ever, this is perhaps the best Zelda clone there is. It takes place in a world that used to be 2D, but the king decreed that it was the age of 3D, and so it was. Now, once again, bad things are happening and you get to save it all. Despite being in 3D, the gameplay is very faithful to the original 2D Zelda style, perhaps a bit closer to Link to the Past though. You'll get lots of gadgets to help you cross obstacles that you couldn't before. The dungeons can get pretty complex, and these are always really fun to figure out. You're going to spend a lot of time in these. The best part is that when you have full health, your sword is ridiculously huge, and this makes the game a lot of fun. There's plenty of other stuff to do, like having the blacksmith improve your sword, collecting enemies for the bestiary, and lots of other fun stuff. The visuals are amazing, and I suspect that they're going to age extremely well. There's a shallow depth of field and some cool physics going on when you kill an enemy, like they're pixels scattering all around. It all looks very nice. The music is just as good with some really memorable tunes. This is an extremely overlooked game, and you can't blame people for passing it up with a name like this. So you're going to want to make sure to pick it up before it escalates in price. It's worth playing through for sure, and I think I might like it better than Zelda itself.
Smash Brothers is a series of games that you usually either love or you hate. As for me, I just kind of like it. Back in the days of the N64, Nintendo released the first game in the series, and it was something that Nintendo fanboys went crazy for. I mean, how could you not like a fighting game based on characters from all over the Nintendo universe? As the years went by, each subsequent system from Nintendo saw a version of Smash Brothers. These releases added new characters, backgrounds, music, and all sorts of stuff to collect in the game. There's always been a big argument over whether this is a real fighting game or not. The people who hate the series, of course, don't think this is a valid fighter. The people that do love it think it qualifies. It's not the deepest fighter out there, but I recognize it as a fighting game. Either way, it doesn't matter because the series is hugely popular. And Sony saw just how popular it was and said, hey, we've got tons of mascots, so why don't we make a fighting game of our own with all of them in it? That's exactly what they did and released PlayStation's All-Star Battle Royale for the PS3 and Vita. This, of course, is the PS3 version here. I'm a fan of a lot of Sony's franchises, and I played enough Smash to think that I'd have a good time with this game as well. There's always room for more wacky fighting games. As far as copying Smash Brothers, this game almost could have been developed by HAL Laboratories as it feels that similar. If you've played Smash Brothers before, you can easily pick up Battle Royale and not have any issues. The controls are just as basic. Sony's game gives you one more attack button, which is kind of nice. Controlling each character is pretty good. Just like in Smash, I sometimes find myself facing away from my opponent attacking the air. I won't fault that to the game, but accepted that it's just me being too eager to start attacking before I'm facing my enemy. Instead of a smash ball like in Smash Brothers, the game actually has a gauge you fill up for super moves. There's 3 super moves that you can initiate that correspond to the super gauge. Level 1 super is weak, level 2 is stronger, and level 3 is unblockable. You build up the super meter by landing attacks. Sometimes opponents will drop white orbs that, when picked up, will add to your super gauge. As I played the game, I was pretty satisfied by what I saw. There's a lot of really fun characters to play like Kratos and Nathan Drake. Other ones like Sackboy were really hard for me to control, so I stopped using them until I felt like a challenge. Each one has their own storyline that is kind of entertaining, but whatever. There's also random items that'll pop up on stage for you to use. Things like guns, fish, and food. Just like in Smash, you have backgrounds that are modeled after the included franchises. Each background has 2 different games that it represents. All of them were really interesting to see, and there were lots of times when I found myself staring at the background instead of the action. You can turn background hazards off if you want to, but it's kind of fun worrying about if you're going to get hit by something back there or fall into a trap. And of course the music comes from the same games as the backgrounds. The only real problem that I had with this game is that when the fighting gets spread out, your character gets pretty small. It makes it really tough to see what the hell's going on. Other than that, I have a great time playing this game. It's not quite as good as Smash Bros., but it's still very much worth your time. Hell, you can currently buy it brand new for $11 at Amazon, and it's definitely worth that price.
Alright, now it's Drake time.
We all know and love the original Mega Man series on the NES. Okay, well, maybe not all of us, but enough of us. Enough people liked it that they even made a couple of sequels. Mega Man runs around shooting things, going through each boss's unique stage and then defeating them. He then steals the boss's weapon to use for himself. Talk about adding insult to injury. Often Mega Man will get equipped with other items from Dr. Light as well. You can use these equipped items and weapons to help you get past certain parts of each stage if you like. It's a fantastic series that Capcom has never ignored. Yeah. The Cryon Conquest by Vic Tokai is a pretty decent, let's say, homage to Mega Man. You star as a witch who's trying to save Earth from destruction in the futuristic year of 1999. She shoots projectiles from her wand in a similar fashion as Mega Man shoots from his arm. There's no stage select here though. The game is completely linear. You can even shoot up as well as duck, though you can't shoot any lower than your standing position. You've got a bunch of different items that you can select from in the start menu, and you'll have access to all of these right away. Like in Mega Man, you're going to constantly be interrupting gameplay to select a new wand type. This is something that kind of annoys me. Don't design your game so I'm constantly switching to a different screen to select a different weapon or item. This game is balls hard and it's gonna make you its bitch in no time. She even dies kind of like Mega Man. And look at the box art. This sure as hell doesn't look like an action game. No wonder the sales were so bad. The graphics aren't bad at all, but the music doesn't have anywhere near the sophistication of any given Mega Man title. This is an interesting game I've only ever seen advertised in magazines, and I've never played it until now. The Japanese version has continues and cutscenes that were removed from the US version because we hate stuff like that over here, I guess. Lastly, there's Shockman on the TurboGrafx 16. The character you play as even kind of looks like a Mega Man villain. The bosses are sure more interesting looking than Mega Man bosses though. However, this boss fight right here looks like it could definitely be in a Mega Man game. Like the Cryon Conquest, this is very linear. The gameplay is pretty self-explanatory, but nowhere near as complex as Mega Man. You don't have to worry about switching a lot of different weapons and items around. However, you can shoot upwards, which is definitely cool, and you can also duck, which is also cool. You might be tempted to turn on the rapid fire and blast away at your heart's content, but that's really not a good idea in this game. It'll actually make it a lot tougher. You do have a charge shot similar to Mega Man X, but using this honestly can sometimes make the game too easy. So what I personally do is turn on rapid fire during the stages and turn it off during the bosses. There's even some non-run and gun levels to play through to add some variety. These stages are okay, but I do feel that they're kinda tacked on. There's lots of dialogue between and even during each stage to help you get into the gripping drama that is Shockman for the TurboGrafx 16. Overall, while I think the game plays decently enough, I don't personally feel that it's one of the standout titles for the system. It's not horrible or anything, but I think you can do better, and I definitely think Mega Man is the better game. It does have some pretty good graphics and slightly better than decent music though.
Alright, there we are, halfway through this thing, and yeah, I can definitely see the inspiration some of these developers took for their own game.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, do you think Zelda's been copied enough, Joe?
I don't think so, at least not on Sega platforms, not that there's going to be anymore.
Yeah, well, that's true, but I think it's, come on,
3D
guys.
Game Heroes, though, you gotta try it out.
That is an awesome game, yes.
Anyway, we've got more for you, so hey, here we go.
As many of you know, God of War is one of my favorite series of games out there. I bought a PlayStation 3 based on the fact that eventually God of War 3 was going to be released for it. I'm well aware that the game's combat is very repetitive. You do the same thing over and over again, which is kill a room full of enemies, move on, kill another room full of enemies, and solve a simple puzzle or two. Why don't I get sick of this? I think it's because the series does so much right, and the atmosphere of each game is right up my alley. I love that it revolves around Greek mythology. I love the creatures that you have to fight, like centaurs, minotaurs, and cyclops. I like the stylized killing of bigger enemies with quick-time button actions. I know a lot of people don't like quick-time events, but I do. I could endlessly watch a centaur get split from neck to asshole while its innards are falling out of its body. I love that kind of detail. Dante's Inferno came out right around the same time as God of War 3. It came out on the PS3, Xbox 360, and the PSP, but I'm playing it on the PS3 here. It's obviously based on Dante Alighieri's book The Inferno. In the game, you play as Dante, who traverses the 9 layers of hell to get his wife back. I'd heard that the game played a lot like God of War, so I was pretty excited to see how close it was. Well, it's damn close. Just like God of War, you have a weapon that has a huge range and it can be upgraded with attachments. You can kill enemies just with your scythe, or you can grab them. If you grab them, you can choose to absolve them of their sins or punish them to hell. I more often chose to absolve the sins. I really like watching Dante shoving a crucifix in the face of these demons while they struggle. Whatever you choose to do, it will slowly fill up a meter. Once your meter reaches certain levels, you can purchase attachments that'll make fighting easier. Another thing that this game borrowed from God of War is the quick-time events. It's more or less reserved just for boss fights, but it's here and it looks just as cool. Dante also finds fountains along his path that will refill his life, magic, and give him souls, which are used as currency. This is very similar to Kratos finding treasure chests that hold the same types of items. You can ride beasts in both games, and this is great, as it adds to the overall experience. And of course, God of War had a fair amount of boobs in it, so why shouldn't Dante's Inferno? For a game that duplicates so much from another series, I still feel it had enough of its own charm to keep it from being an exact copy. The storyline is highly enjoyable and the action is solid. The layers of hell that Dante goes through are amazing to look at. Everything kind of looks like what I imagine hell would be really like. Bodies on spikes and laying around the ground deformed, and just the feeling of evil is everywhere. The inner circles of hell are supposed to be worse than the outer circles, but it's all pretty miserable. Dante controls every bit as well as Kratos and looks really cool. I'd like to think that there could be a sequel to this game, but I just don't know how. This is one Copycat game that really worked out well, and I'm glad I had a chance to experience it.
The original Castlevania was one of the most popular games on the NES back when it was released. And for a damn good reason too. It combined solid gameplay and control with a tremendous but fair challenge. Not only that, but the graphics had an extremely unique look to them and could be spotted from a mile away. All the blocks used to construct a level, the stairs, just about everything. And of course the music was just as unique as the graphics and quite amazing in its own right. Castlevania is such a solid game that it should be introduced into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But about video games instead of rock and roll. The first clone of sorts that I ever noticed of Castlevania was Eight Eyes from Taxan on the NES. I saw pictures of it in magazines and I thought to myself, this sure does look a little too much like Castlevania. And it does, just look at the stage layout and the stairs. Gameplay-wise, it really doesn't have much to bring to the table. You're a falconer named Orin, and your falcon is named Curtis? I'll just call him Curtis. Anyway, both you and Curtis have your own life bars, and if either of you die, it's game over. You have a knife for a weapon, and right from the start you're going to notice that your reach is just awful compared to your enemies. Most enemies take multiple hits, and you'll more often than not get hit yourself in the process. You can collect weapons like in Castlevania, but here you can carry more than one at a time and cycle through them with the mighty select button. Instead of hearts, you collect crucifixes to give your weapons ammo. So Nintendo censors the crosses in Castlevania, but not in Eight Eyes. Okay. To wander from area to area in a stage on your way to the boss, you need to find a switch to open a door and then make it to the door before it closes back up. This can be harder than it looks in some places. Fortunately, you can send Curtis out to do things for you like throw switches. Unfortunately, Curtis is extremely hard to control. The good news is that once you kill enough enemies, they'll stop regenerating in that area. Speaking of enemies, they've definitely been inspired by Castlevania. These dumb birds have patterns like the Medusa heads, only their trajectory is much wider and much harder to avoid. They even have red skeletons here, but you can kill them for good! The good news is that there really aren't a lot of bottomless pits you can fall into. The bad news is that I got stuck in this looping maze with no way out. The graphics are okay, but certainly not as nice as Castlevania, and the music, though varied, really didn't tickle my ears. I sure feel sorry for kids who got this one instead of Castlevania. A lot of people think that Holy Diver by Irem on the Famicom strongly resembles Castlevania. Well, let's see. You play as a dude who fires shots but with a short range, so I guess this can be seen as a similar weapon to a whip. However, you can also shoot straight up. The first stage kinda resembles Castlevania with its blocky structure, but the later stages definitely do not. You get new magic after you beat each stage, which will help you progress along, and this is pretty cool. The graphics are quite frankly outstanding for the NES, and the music is awesome as well. I just don't feel that this one really borrows very heavily from Castlevania. It's definitely its own unique game, and I assume it was programmed by Ronnie James Dio. If you had a Sega Master System instead, you could have picked up Master of Darkness in Europe or worldwide for the Game Gear. In this one, you play as the exciting character of Ferdinand, who's on his way to stop Dracula because his Ouija board told him to. You start out with a stubby little knife, very similar to Eight Eyes, but you'll get weapons with a longer reach in no time. Instead of whipping candles, you stab at floating masks, which will give you power-ups. The one that you really want is the axe. Without it, almost every enemy takes multiple hits to kill. You can also get sub-weapons which are activated the same way which they are in Castlevania by pressing up and attack at the same time. You don't collect hearts or anything like that, but you can supplement your ammo by collecting more of the same sub-weapon. My favorite is probably the boomerang or the gun. Just looking at this game, you automatically think about Castlevania, and it could almost pass off as one. With all of the newer Metroidvanias that don't use a whip for a weapon, Ferdinand could fit right in. You break walls to find health items and try to make your way to secret areas, so it's pretty shameless in its homages. Sadly, the game itself just doesn't evoke the same kind of eerie atmosphere. I mean, I'm playing as some dude from London named Ferdinand, and you're fighting bosses like Jack the Ripper. The game's visuals do a good job of representing the time period from over 100 years ago though. They also do a damn good job at looking like Castlevania. And I mean a damn good job. Hell, maybe a little too good, don't you think? The music is okay, some of it's really repetitive. There's no FM sound option here. Still though, I'd recommend you pick up the European version for your Master System as it works just fine in a US model or even on a Genesis with a power base converter. And if you're already in Europe, then you don't need to worry about importing it. You likely already have it and you love it.
Strider from Capcom is a great game. This is the Genesis version I'm playing here, but it started out as an arcade game. Even though it's just your typical action game, it has a great feel to it. The way Strider controlled felt fresh and unlike anything else at the time it was released. It was so cool to see that huge arcing slice from his sword and watching his enemies blow up as if they had a grenade in their stomach. Jumping was another cool thing. Well, I mean the way Strider looked when he jumped was really cool. I like how his body is stretched out and not balled up. Sadly, you're not able to control him while he's in the air. This led to a lot of accidental deaths for me, but I learned to live with that and I eventually made my jumps at the right time. Having the ability to cling to walls and ceilings is great, and it gave you more options to play through each level. Then, Strider could slide under obstacles, which was really cool. All this made for a very memorable gaming experience. Atlas must have liked it too, because they borrowed several of Strider's techniques for Run Saber on the Super Nintendo. Now, while this game isn't a complete mimic of Strider, it's hard not to get the feeling that it's definitely inspired by it. But Run Saber is a pretty fun game on its own right. The main play mechanics that it took from Strider are the sword action, climbing, and the sliding technique. Your hero feels a lot like Strider as you play through each level. Just like in Strider, you can get an upgrade for your sword which makes it longer and stronger. I'll let you make up your own joke for that one. Climbing on walls and ceilings feels exactly the same, and it really adds to the gameplay. One really fun mechanic they added was the ability to do a downward kick when you're in the air. This is a pretty powerful move, and it's fun to kill lots of enemies with it. It works really well on boss fights too. You also have a hyper bomb that you can unleash. This does damage your enemies, but it's really hard to say how much damage since you only see it registering one hit after it's done. There's only 5 levels in this game, but each one is fairly long and they all have multiple boss fights. Most are just sub-bosses and end with a pretty big character to fight at the end. Overall, it's a really fun game. Another game that is borrowed from Strider is called Osman, and that was an arcade-only release. In fact, several former Capcom employees who worked on Strider worked on this one. This is a fun action platformer with loads of enemies and big sprites. As you play through some of the levels, it's hard not to think about Strider. In fact, the first level looks a lot like the layout from Strider's first level. Climbing walls and killing enemies that are on the other side as you're climbing is totally Strider. Even the way the enemies explode after you kill them is way too close to be a coincidence. There's no sword action here, but if there was, Mitchell might have been served a lawsuit by Capcom for similarities. The action is solid and the game progresses at a good pace, so there's never a dull moment. It's an easy game since I'm playing it on MAME and have unlimited continues. If you only had a few quarters, then it wouldn't be easy. Still, this does deliver a fun experience.
Alright, so those are some copycat games, for lack of a better term for you. I'm sure those aren't the only games out there that take inspiration from other games.
No, a lot of these ideas could be actually pretty subtle. I mean, let us know if there's some of them out there that you're like playing and you're like, oh man, this reminds me of that other game.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that, you know, because we're interested in hearing about that.
Exactly. Let us know. And in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSet. Ghouls and Ghosts. I've had this since it came out. It's one of my favorite games. Really means a lot to me.
Did you say Ghouls and Ghosts means a lot to you?
It does, yeah.
You know what means a lot? Ghouls and Ghosts on the Master System. It means a lot of money.
Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei. Despite the redundant name, I'm really glad to finally add this one to my collection.
You know, Joe, you're right. That is a great game.
It really is.
Yeah, but you know what's even better? Panzer Dragoon Saga. And I've got it! I notice you don't have it in your collection.
My first arcade game, Ganta the Diver 2 Party Time. I mean, you're not particularly fantastic or anything, but hey, I'm glad to finally have an arcade game of my very own.
Joe, that is awesome news. You're starting to collect arcade games.
I am.
And you know what? I am too, but look at my first game. It's Golden Axe 2, The Revenge of Death Adder. This game wasn't even released outside of the arcade. It's so awesome. And I've got it.
Damn that, Dave!